Good evening, and Shavua Tov. Welcome to this week's, past week's, I guess, Parashat Shlach, which means descend. So, you know what we do here, or at least what I do here. I'm just going to go over the Parashat for this week. Post Parashat, I hopefully would like to get into where I can do this before. Sometime during the week instead of after the Parashat has already passed. But anyway, to get through this week's, that was very squeaky. This week's Parashat is from Numbers 13, chapter 13, all the way to the end of Numbers 15. And it's a very interesting Parashat. I actually particularly like this parasha. It's the parasha where we get the commandment from the Tzitzit. So there's some good things in here. This is not so good of a parasha in that this is sort of the downfall of, right? This is the reason why we have the Jewish people wandering in the desert for 40 years. Not exactly a good thing. But there's some stuff that we can definitely learn. A lot of really good intricacies that are inside of this parasha that we're going to go over tonight. And your hint for tonight is that this parasha starts the way that it ends, if that makes sense. So you know that it ends with the Tzitzit. So what do I mean by that? How do I mean that this parasha starts the way that it ends? It actually starts. We'll do a quick overview before we get really into it of the sending out of the 12 spies. Right. Many of us know the story. They send the 12 spies out to scout the land. And they do so. They come back. They got some fruits, and they're like, "Yo, this place is actually really awesome." But they are fearful, and they give a bad report. Interestingly enough, there's two different reports. Just real quickly, there's the report that they can't take it, right? So, and then there is the lie. There's a lying report that's after the bad report. So a lot of people don't realize that there's actually two separate reports happening. So that the 10 spies are trying to essentially discourage more or less the people. And when that doesn't seem to be working, that's when they start coming up with lies about the land. So the initial report, which is fine here, verse 27 in chapter 13. They gave their account to him and said, "We went into the land where you sent us. Indeed, it is flowing with milk and honey. This is some of its fruit." And they have the fruit. "Except the people living in the land are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. And we even saw the sons of Anak there. Amalek is living in the land of the Negev. The Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites are living in the mountains, and the Canaanites are living near the sea along the bank of the Jordan." So that's the discouraging portion of the report. So far, there's no lie, and so far, no problem has been committed so far. This is just, they are reporting exactly what they see, but you can tell from the way that they are saying this report, that their intention, right, is not, it's not like, "Oh, but don't worry about it," right? Because they sort of lead with, "These are the good things in the land," but they end with, "These are the really bad things, though. These are some of the stuff we have to overcome." If it were maybe worded in the other way around, perhaps it might be a different story. But it seems, you can just tell by reading it that the mood very much seems to be discouraging. So if we go on, then Caleb quieted the people because they were already like, "Oh, that doesn't sound so good." Verse 31, but the men who had gone up with him said, and these are the 10 spies, we cannot attack these people because they are stronger than we, right? So now we're starting to get in really bad territory. This is the lie now. Verse 32, they spread among the sons of Israel a bad, it says, most translations say a bad report. This is a lie. This is a lying report about the land that they had explored, saying, the land through which we had passed to explore devours its residents. All the people we saw there are men of great size. We also saw them there, the Nephilim. The sons of Anak are from the Nephilim in parentheses, parenthetical note. And we seemed like grasshoppers in our eyes as well as theirs. It's an interesting way that the TLV has decided to translate that. So the part of the lie is that the Nephilim were probably not actually there. Because when 40 years later, when we're seeing Joshua leading the Israelites in to conquer the land, the Nephilim are never mentioned again. So it's likely that that's part of the lie. And that they were just doing this in order to further discourage the people, make them lose heart. But the biggest problem with the Israelites right here, this is the sin, is we seemed like grasshoppers in our eyes. So far, okay, that's fine. But we were like grasshoppers also in their eyes. That's the problem. That was actually a lot of commentaries, if you read them. In fact, I should probably break one open and read it to you. But that is actually the initial sin. That's the most problematic part of this entire report. And so, yeah, I'm actually going to do that. I'm going to pull out a Chumash and read that portion. Let's see here. So we are Parashat Shlach, numbers. We're in 13, end of 13. Yes. Here we go. It's the end of 13. And so we were in their eyes. So giant, both a word and generic term for giant and proper noun, father of giants living in Hebron and Anak. All right, so here's the commentary for this particular verse. And so we were in their eyes. Now, although the giants came into contact daily with the people of ordinary height, so that the Jewish spies would not seem especially small to them, the spies meant to imply that even the average people in Hebron were usually tall, and that the Jews looked like grasshoppers to them. Okay, that's from Or HaChaim. The Rebbe of Kotsk commented that this declaration was the root of the spies' sin, that they had no right to consider how the giants viewed them. As Jews and emissaries of the Jewish people, they should have thought only of their mission and not of what anybody else thought of them. Only after the spies viewed themselves as insignificant do they claim that others saw them in the same way. That is the root of the sin of the spies' report. So essentially, they had no right to put words in the mouth of the others, first of all, but also that they were so preoccupied with the way that other people viewed them. Right? It's not such a wrong thing to say, well, we seem like grasshoppers, right? We think we look like grasshoppers to them. That's bad, right? But the second you say, and they saw us as grasshoppers, well, you don't know that. That's not for you to make that call. And you're too worried about what other people think of you. And the whole thing is really bad, but that's like the core of the issue. But that's not what tonight's lesson is on, but that is an important piece of tonight's lesson. So I wanted to make sure that you have that idea, that you understand moving forward the seriousness. So we get to chapter 14. And then we have this declaration that they're going to basically wander in the desert for 40 years because of of this particular incident. There's a interesting bit and piece after being told that they're not allowed to enter the land. That the Israelites suddenly are like, no, we got this, we can take it now, but it's too late. And so they try to do a thing, but they get beaten back into the wilderness, and so they assume wandering in the wilderness for the next 40 years until the generation dies off. Immediately following that episode, what we actually get is This is essentially after, this is the start of chapter 15. Immediately after they go into the desert, the first thing they're being told is, verse 2 of chapter 15, speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, when you enter the land I'm giving you, where you will make your homes. So it's like a moment of, it seems kind of weird, but it's sort of a moment of comfort, that even though they're being pushed back into the desert for 40 years, he still says to them, I'm still giving you the land. You haven't taken it away from you. You're still going to get it. It's just, it won't be your generation per se. But this is the land for the Jewish people. This is still going to be your legacy. I'm still going to give it to you. So when you enter the land and make your homes, right? So there's still a sense of comfort in what's being said here. So even though this is followed by basically types of offerings and stuff, the whole point is that there's still the promise of you're going to get into the land. It just won't be your generation, but it will still belong to you. And then after that, we have this interesting episode of a man trying to gather wood on Shabbat. And so they bring him in for judgment, and then they basically say he deserves a death penalty, so they stone him. And then immediately after that, we have the Tzitzit, right? Which this is the last paragraph in the Shema. For those of you that are aware, the Shema has 3 paragraphs, 2 from Deuteronomy, 1 run here from Numbers. And it's this right here. Hashem spoke to Moses saying, speak to the Bnei Israel, the sons of Israel, and say to them that they are to make for themselves tzitzits on the corner of their garments throughout their generations. They are put a blue cord, or techelet. This sky blue color of techelet on each tzitzit, so that it will be your own tzitzit, and you will see it whenever you look at them and remember all the commandments that Hashem has commanded you, not to go out spying after your own eyes and after your own heart, prostituting yourselves, as my translation says. This way you will remember and obey all of my mitzvot, and you will be holy to your God. I am Hashem, your God. I brought you out of the land of Egypt to be a God to you. I am Hashem, your God. Okay, so that's the last paragraph of the Shema. This is where I say that the Parashat starts the same way that it ends. All right, so what do I mean by that? Take a quick closer look at exactly what was the problem here with this this person with the man collecting wood. When Bnei Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering wood on Shabbat. Those who found him gathering wood brought him to Moshe and Aaron and the entire assembly, and they kept him under arrest, not being clear as to what was to be done with him. Okay. Why is it not so clear what's to be done with him? What exactly has he done wrong? If we look at the Torah command, we know you can't strike a match. We know you can't light a fire, and you can't do any work. And gathering wood could be like considered work, but what exactly is? I mean, he hasn't done anything wrong yet. Not, at least not particularly that we can spot, right? But what is exactly the heart of what he's done? It is the beginnings of what would be the worst part of the whole thing. So, and this is also meant to be, a demonstration. This is sort of a one-time demonstration of the seriousness of certain crimes. You usually don't see this kind of thing happen again. But there are classifications in traditional Judaism of things that you can and cannot touch because of their nature on Sabbath day. For example, you're not supposed to be handling technology on the Sabbath in like a modern day Orthodox setting. And so this would be classified as mukser, which means you can't touch it. So even if you don't use it on the Sabbath, right? Even if you don't turn it on and actually work with it, but you're not supposed to be holding it because it could accidentally turn on or you could interact with it. It's something that you shouldn't be using on the Sabbath anyway. So you just don't even touch it. You just leave it where it is. And some homes will even, like if they have accidentally laid their phone on a book and then the Sabbath begins, they will no longer go near the book. They won't touch the book because it's resting on the book, and they don't want to cause the technology to turn on or whatever. And so they just leave the book there. As just a quick example. So he's gathering wood, right? And so we don't know his intentions. We don't have any indication that he was intending on making a fire. But we do know a couple of things. He was probably collecting wood outside the camp. And so he would have been carrying into the camp, which would be a breaking of the commandment against carrying from one domain to another. So if he was outside the camp collecting wood, even if he hasn't broken the commandment yet and they've arrested him prior to, the obvious intent is that he would have had to carry that wood into the camp, which would be a violation of Shabbat. For the same reason that you can't gather the manna on Shabbat, not only is the manna not there, but you had to go outside the camp to get the manna, so you'd have to bring it into the camp, and by doing that, you'd be carrying on Shabbat, and that is a violation. So you can't do that. So that there's a clear intent there. We don't know that he was going to go into his home and start a fire and do all sorts of violations, but there seems to be the implication that what he is doing is he's doing that. He's being careless with his actions. He's not being careful to make sure that he sanctifies the day. The Sabbath is a holy day, and when you do things that when you flirt with things you're not supposed to be doing on the Sabbath day, you rob the Sabbath day of its holiness in this viewpoint. Now, you can disagree or agree with that statement. I'm not here to fight with that. It doesn't matter. That's the teaching. The idea is this person was about to commit a massive violation. Technically, he had not yet, or at least we don't know. We weren't told. It's possible that he had, or it's possible that the Israelites caught him before he did, because they wanted to be careful not to violate the holiness of the day, and so they like stopped him at the gate while he had the wood, and they were like, no, you come up to the line. This is where you stop. That's enough. And they didn't know what to do with him at first, and that's why they arrested him and they asked what to do. And eventually he becomes he's made an example of. What does this teach us? Why does this bring us back all the way to the commandment of the tzitzit, right? So firstly, we see that the tzitzit has a direct correlation with the commandment of the Sabbath. It's directly connected. But it doesn't say so explicitly. That's sort of like inferred when you're reading it in its context. They're directly next to each other, so there's obviously some sort of connection, but it's not said specifically. And especially the portion that makes its way into the Shema has nothing about the Sabbath written in it. In fact, I'll read it again, and I want you to listen to the words, and then we're going to make some other connections that I noticed over the week in my studies. And I want to, and you can tell me in the comments if you agree, if you saw something else, let me know. But Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Bnei Israel and say to them that they are make for themselves tzitzit, tassels, on the corners of their garments throughout their generations. They are to put a cord of techelet, blue, but the word techelet doesn't mean blue, but it is blue, on each tzitzit. It will be your tzitzit. So whenever you look at them, you will remember all of the mitzvot of Hashem, all of the commandments of Hashem, and do them, not go spying after your own hearts and your own eyes, prostituting yourselves. This way you remember and obey all my mitzvot, and you will be holy to your God. I am Hashem your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be a God to you. I'm Hashem your God." Did you catch it? Maybe, maybe not. I'll read the part that I want to focus on. "And you will look at them and remember all of the mitzvot of Hashem and do them, not go spying out after your own heart and your own eyes, prostituting yourselves." I like that this translation uses the word spying, because that is what I mean by this parasha starts the way that it ends. The parasha begins with the 12 spies. So let's go back to that. Let's go all the way back to Numbers 13. "Send out some men on your behalf to investigate the land of Canaan, which I am giving to Bnei Israel." What is the mission of the spies? Now, they were told, basically, go out, scout the land, and tell us what you see. Okay? The initial charge is for them to see how best to proceed with the invasionary process. Their job was not to see what is the word? Their job is not to go looking for things that are unnecessary. They don't need to be reporting on things that are not necessarily pertinent, right? Or relevant, that's the word, to that whole mission. The mission is to, what's the best way to go about this? Should we enter from the south, from the north? Is there valleys we need to be aware of? But instead, they go looking, and they see some things. They see some fruit, and it's all good. And they also saw some very negative things, and it was, you could say, their hearts sank. Okay, so let's see here. These are the names. They went up, explored the land. When they reached the valley, they cut a single branch. That's the fruits that they brought back. And they gave their account, and they went into the land. They sent us indeed flowing with milk and honey. I've already read that bit to you. So, what was the problem? The problem was what they saw. Not what they saw things that they couldn't help to see, but they also saw what they sort of wanted to see in a sense. Their job was not to see other things, right? Not necessarily like you can't avoid just seeing things if they come across your sight and your path. That's not the point I'm trying to get at. They were meant to go and spy out for a particular reason, and it was not the reason that they eventually end up giving. Okay? Are you following me? Essentially, they were following after their own heart and their own eyes. They saw essentially what they wanted to see, and it was discouraging, and they continued to see the discouragement. It was the issue, and they followed their gut feeling, right? So instead of putting all of their trust and leaning on Hashem for how the land was going to be conquered, instead they let their eyes be the judge for their heart on what was going to happen. And what they saw was a land with massive people, whether or not that's true, but they saw it, and their instinct was not to lean on Hashem. Instead, their instinct was to, we can't do this. We can't do it ourselves. So Hashem is not in the picture anymore. They have followed their own eyes and their own heart. That's the biggest part of the problem of the sin with the spies. So it's a lack of trust. Now, does this remind you of any one more particular piece in the entire Torah where we have sight being associated with a grave downfall, if you will? So you think they see this land, and they make this report, and they gave into their heart's desires to try and do things their way, their own way, having left Hashem out of it, instead of leaning on Hashem to trust Hashem and Hashem only, and not on their own abilities, following after their own heart. Instead, they tried to do exactly that. They tried to figure out their way, tried to see if they could do it, and they leaned on their own understanding, their own heart, and they basically talked themselves out of it. Do we see that anywhere else? Which leads to, because this leads to a 40-year downfall. The first comment's golden calf. That's a fairly good. That's not the one I'm looking for, but that's a good connection. I think you could say that, but it's not exactly the connection I'm going for. So I'll go ahead and I'll give it away to you if you haven't figured it out quite yet. The garden. What was it that Eve says, right, when she's having this conversation with the serpent? I'll turn to it now. If you have your Tanachs, chapter 3, verse 6. Now the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a thing of lust for the eyes, right? And that the tree was desirable for imparting wisdom. That word desirable, the heart, in the Hebrew mindset, the heart is the seat of your will. Your heart is your desires. It's the seat of your will. So when you say not my will, but your will, what you mean is to say you're putting aside your desires, the seat of your desires. You're putting away your heart, and you want God's heart, right? You want the will of Hashem instead. So that's this idea. The desire is seated in the heart of the person. When the mouth speaks, when the heart overflows, the mouth speaks. I believe is the way the master said it once. So it was desirable for imparting wisdom. So she took of its fruit She ate it. So you could say she collected, right, the apple, or whatever fruit it was. We don't know that it was an apple, and she ate of it. And she gave also to her husband who was with her, and he ate. And the both of them had their eyes open. There's another. This connection goes even further, because my initial thought when I was first reading this was, that reminds me of the garden, right? She began. At what point did the sin take root in her heart? Was it when she saw it, or was it when she collected the fruit? Let's say it's an apple for the sake of, if she picked the apple and held it in her hand, would that have been a sin? No, not necessarily. Technically, the sin begins when she eats it, but if she's picked the apple, then the sin's already taken root in her heart. She's had the battle internally, so she's already essentially committed to the eating of it. And that begins when she says in her heart, after seeing with her eyes, that it was a thing to be desired. Okay? So it goes further. After reading it again, when we see the man collecting wood, right? So we know you could make this connection that he's already made this decision. Right? He probably wants wood for fire. He probably wants to do these, make these preparations, which you shouldn't be doing. But he saw it at first. There's got to be some sort of sight being dealt with in this particular example, most likely. And so he goes out and he begins the collecting process. That the sin is of taking the holiness away from the day has already taken its root. And so he's essentially committed to it. He gets caught. And so it's slightly different, but what immediately comes out after the sin. So we have the sin, a death occurs, and then a garment is given. Right? Do you see what I'm going at? So what we have is their eyes get opened. So a death has occurred. Now, death in Hebrew does not always mean an actual literal death. That's why sometimes you see sleep, to help clarify. But death means separation from Hashem, to be separate from him. That is a type of death. When Adam and Chava were taken out of the garden, that was a death, right? The day you eat of it, in dying you shall die. They died by that separation. That death occurs in the Hebrew mindset by that separation, by the removal. So their eyes get opened, and they saw that they were naked, and so they sewed fig leaves together for themselves, right, to try and cover themselves. What do we have in the story of this week's Parashat is that immediately following the sin, there's a garment involved, and that we are to make for ourselves tzitzit, right, as a reminder not to follow after our own eyes and our own heart, of which we sin after, as my translation says, you prostitute yourselves. Is a stronger language, but it, nonetheless, but to remember and do the commandments which Hashem has given us. So the sin begins in the eye, right? This is why the bad eye is a popular idiom in Hebrew culture, ancient Hebrew culture. But it begins with the sight. The sin takes root in the mind. The desire, it gives birth to sin. Some of these phrases should be ringing a bell to you from New Testament texts, right? From people like Paul or something, and especially the Master, right? So that's what you have, is this garment is being involved. Now, eventually God makes a garment for Adam and Chava. He makes for them a garment from animal skin, and because they attempted to try and make their own fig leaves for the garment to cover themselves, and that surely that as a garment could work. You could say there's nothing wrong with them trying to cover themselves a piece of clothing out of fig leaves. It seems to be fine. It's just the problem is that doesn't make a proper atonement. A death has to be involved, and so Hashem, in tradition, slaughters an animal and then uses the skin. Right? There's an atonement. There's a picture of the slaughter in order for that atonement to happen, and he uses that to cover them. But a garment is involved, and the garment is, and if you go on an adventure with me for a minute, if you're Adam and Chava, and this is not exactly you were born this way and it was natural to you, and now suddenly your eyes are opened and you feel naked for the first time. You notice it. You would likely, in my opinion, forever associate clothing with this particular episode, right? I mean, if it were me, that's at least that's what I think. I think that every time I put on a piece of clothing, I would be forever reminded that I sort of did this to myself, right? I now have to remember, and this clothing, this garment that God made for me is my reminder that I am a screw up and I need His help, and that's the reminder that God has given to Adam and Chava, right? So immediately following the episode of the man collecting the wood, we have a garment for remembrance, right? Because we're screw ups, and we constantly need a reminder, and that's exactly what the Tzitzit's job is to do. It's a mirror, to me at least. That's what I see. I see a very clear correlation, not only with the sin of the spies, where the sin took root from their sight, spying after their own heart and their own trusting in and of themselves, is partially what led to this whole episode to begin with. And so the Tzitzit is sort of like this daily reminder that we need for ourselves. It's a garment, right? Just like the garment was given in the garden. Something that we put on as a daily reminder, and it's a big part of our daily dress, right? So at least it can be, maybe not for everybody, but it's very visible, and it's meant to remind you that you cannot trust in yourself, that you should put away your own desires, and that especially for holiness, we don't always understand the concept of holiness. We don't always understand why, but it's not really always for us to understand. It's good that we should question everything, absolutely, but you're not always going to get an answer, and sometimes you have to be okay with that. Just, of course, depending on the situation. It's not universal, but I think you understand what I mean. So that's what I see. I see that direct correlation. That's me. Let me know if you see it too. If not, maybe I'm like, hey, Seamus, you're an idiot. This is actually what it means. Please put a comment. Let me know. Correct me. I'm always down for correction. But I just wanted to give you guys a quick synopsis of what I saw over the week in my studies. Is I saw a direct correlation with the Tzitzit and the garden, and the same correlation happening with the sight, the sin of sight, happening at the very beginning of the Parashat. And so that's its connection. So it sort of starts here in Parashat Shlach at chapter 13 and ends with a way to help protect ourselves from falling into the same sin that, one, led us out of the garden, and two, kept us from being in the land for 40 years. So, you can shrug off these reminders if you wish, but the reminders serve a purpose, and we should always be ever present of Hashem in our lives. It should affect us in everything that we do, in the way that we dress, in the way that we talk. And especially because of the way that we dress, we're so always cognizant of the kind of thing that we have on us, that it helps keep us in check. And especially for the sin with eyes, you can't obviously control what passes in front of you, right? If you see something in passing, but you can control what you gaze at. The problem was not that Adam and Chava couldn't look at the tree. They obviously probably looked at the tree all the time. The difference was when she began to gaze at the tree, she began to want the tree, and it starts in the eyes, but it's not just like, oh, she saw the tree and that's the sin. The sin takes root when she began to gaze, right, intently. It's just to kind of lust after the tree is the way that. And so that's really where the sin of the eyes kind of comes into play. It's not that you just see something and you're like, oh, I shouldn't have seen that. That's a sin. It's not the same thing. It's when you focus, when that becomes your center, your focus, that's where the sin has already taken its root. And so the Tzitzit are a way to try and bring the focus back to Hashem, where it belongs, instead of after our own desires and our own heart, because it always invariably tends to lead us into bad places. God's got a good track record here, and we've got a very bad track record, and both seem to be very consistent. We tend to always be screw-ups, God tends to always be, well, is always loving, forgiving, and giving us ways to help us fight these shortcomings in some way. So that's all I got for you guys tonight. I know it's super late, at least in the East Coast, it's really late, it's 1 a.m. But I was out because it's, Motzei Shabbos. So I'm hanging out with people and doing things. So, but anyway, thank you guys so much for your time, for watching. I hope you enjoyed this parasha like I did. I enjoyed studying it. And I will see you guys next week for next week's parasha, Parashat Korach. Another very interesting episode that we will get into with other connections that I've also seen. Hopefully I can get this one knocked out before Shabbos so that you can have that lesson up instead of after Shabbos, I guess, or Shabbat, whatever. I'm not Ashkenazi, but I flip between the two. I can't decide what I am or not. Anyway, thank you for your guys' time. Everybody, I hope you had a meaningful and restful Shabbat this week, and Shavua Tov to all of you, and to all of our supporters. Thank you very much.